Yo, what's good everyone? Welcome back to the channel. It is officially week 1 of the 2022 fantasy football season, and I'm sure you all are just as excited as I am. What I wanted to do here today was take a first look at the week 1 DraftKings main slate for next Sunday. We got 13 different games to comb through, and I wanted to talk about some of the cash game plays and GPP plays that were sticking out to me here early on in the week. But before we dive into that, if you could like this video and subscribe to the channel, I would greatly appreciate that. Now let's go ahead and take a first look here at week 1. Alright, so for those of you who are new to this video or don't remember what we did last year with these first looks, what we do is we go position by position, again, talking about some of the players that are sticking out to me here early on in the week from a cash game and GPP perspective. As you can see, we still have 165 hours before kickoff next Sunday on this main slate. I'm recording this here on Sunday, September 4th. But once we go through each position here, we're then going to come full circle with this video by putting together a first look cash lineup and a first look GPP lineup for week 1. So kicking things off here with the quarterbacks, first thing that sticks out to me is the big four right at the top. We got Mahomes, Herbert, Jackson, and Kyler Murray. Now, I personally really don't want much to do with Aaron Rodgers here, at least not initially. We know he's not going to make mistakes early on in the season, but we have no idea what this offense is going to look like without Davante Adams. I'm very high on Aaron Jones in week 1 against the Minnesota Vikings, and I'll talk about that once we get to the running backs, but A-Rod, I really don't like him on the cash game side of things for sure. Maybe a little GPP exposure, but honestly not really interested in that either. But we know that Mahomes, Herbert, Jackson, and Kyler Murray, those guys have a high ceiling and a high floor most weeks, so we can play them in cash or GPP. Now, Kyler definitely sticks out to me of those four from a cash game perspective, but honestly, I'd rather just save that $400 and go to Jalen Hurts here. Now, when it comes to a cash game quarterback, obviously we want to make sure that they can throw the ball, but having that rushing upside is so important, and there's only a handful of guys in the NFL that bring that week in and week out. Jalen Hurts is certainly one of those quarterbacks, and I love that matchup in week 1 against the Detroit Lions. Detroit is certainly going to be a better football team in general this year, but still not a team I'm too concerned about. Jalen Hurts is definitely going to be able to put up points against them. Now, below Jalen Hurts, one guy that sticks out to me on the GPP side of things here is Kirk Cousins of the Minnesota Vikings. Now, the Vikings do have a tough matchup at home week 1 against the Green Bay Packers, and I kind of just talked about them with Aaron Rodgers. We really have no idea what that offense is going to look like early on in the season, but what we do know is that they should have one of the best defenses in the NFL this year. But with that, I think that's going to kind of scare people off of this Minnesota offense in week 1, and we should be able to get guys like Kirk Cousins at relatively low ownership. And I think that Minnesota Vikings offense is going to score a lot of points this year, so I definitely like him from the GPP side of things. You know, obviously easy to stack him up with guys like Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen, but I like KJ Osborne and Irv Smith as well, assuming he's ready to roll in week 1. And then right below Kirk Cousins, I also like Trey Lance as well, both on the cash game side of things and GPP side of things. From the cash game side of things, if you need to save $800 off of Jalen Hurts, I think this is a nice pivot. Very similar style of quarterback play, right? They both offer that rushing upside, and being that this is kind of his first real start, I know he played last year, but his first real start knowing he's going to be the starter, the team is behind him, Kyle Shanahan is behind him, I wouldn't be surprised if he rushes the ball 10 plus times in week 1 against the Chicago Bears, who are going to be one of the worst teams in the NFL this year, so I really like that matchup as well. For those of you who have watched my cash game videos in the past, you know I'm shooting for 3x value, 150 DraftKings points week in and week out. Trey Lance would need to get 18 DraftKings points at that price of $6,000. I by all means think he can do that, especially in that matchup against Chicago. Right below him, I like Derek Carr on the GPP side of things. That's a game in general that I think a lot of people will want to target against the Chargers. Some high-scoring upside in that game for sure, and you bring in a guy like Davante Adams, it certainly doesn't hurt the upside for Derek Carr. But the next guy that I really have my eye on here from the tournament side of things is Tua. Now, I don't really mind the matchup at home here against the New England Patriots, not a team that really scares me, and people are just off Tua in general. We're going to be able to get him at really low ownership. You bring in Tyree Tyreek Hill. You still got Jalen Waddle. Really easy to stack them up with those two guys there. But below Tua, there's a little bit of GPP appeal here. Some guys I'm going to look into a little bit further as the week goes on. But as of right now, it's Jalen Hurts and Trey Lance that stick out to me on the cash side of things, and then Kirk Cousins and Tua that stick out to me on the GPP side of things. All right, now moving over here to the running back side. Try not to get too cute when it comes to this position. Keep it really simple, especially when it comes to my cash game lineups. Looking for guys who get 20 plus touches per game and are going to be involved in the rushing game. And there's three guys that stick out to me right away who have that upside and appeal. That's Jonathan Taylor and Christian McCaffrey. Those are my top two guys. And then Austin Eckler is right below them. I like Derrick Henry on the GPP side of things. That's a good matchup against the Giants, but I'm not overly high on this Tennessee team and offense in general this year, so that might be a fade for me in week 1. And Dalvin Cook, same thing. I'm kind of targeting that passing offense for the Vikings, so probably won't have a lot of exposure to him. Alvin Kamara and Joe Mixon are two guys that I'll probably want to look into a little bit more, as well as James Conner and DeAndre Swift. But man, do I really like Aaron Jones this year in general, especially in week 1, being that we don't know what this Packers offense is going to look like. No Devontae Adams, right? And that was a guy who was pretty much locked into 10 to 15 targets per game last year. And we all know the splits. When Devontae doesn't play, Aaron Jones gets more involved in the passing game. I think that's going to be a trend that just continues heading into this year, especially in week 1. So, I like him on the cash game side of things. I think he's going to see, 12 plus rushing attempts and then probably 5 plus targets, which is really appealing. But I like him a lot on the GPP side of things as well. We'll create a lineup at the end here. We'll roll out a Kirk Cousins, let's say Justin Jefferson stack, maybe put in Irv Smith, and then run it back with Aaron Jones, because I really like that game in general, and that's a guy who could legit see 10 targets in week 1. So, like him on the cash game side of things, love him on the GPP side of things. We'll have a lot of exposure to Aaron Jones against the Vikings. Now, below Aaron Jones, Nick Chubb, guys like him, Saquon, Montgomery maybe, but I highly doubt it. That's such a tough matchup against the 49ers. Antonio Gibson, maybe just because Robinson's not going to be available week 1. Those guys you can sprinkle into your GPP lineups. I don't have a lot of interest there. I think Saquon's probably the guy that sticks out to me the most, but the next guy that kind of sticks out to me here, just from a PPR upside appeal, is Travis Etienne Jr. against the Washington Commanders. I think that he's going to be an interesting play. Probably don't want to touch him in cash just because he's never played a game in the NFL. But there's definitely some upside there on the GPP side of things. If he gets 10 rushes, 5 targets in this game, and scores a touchdown, that's a guy who could have some really solid value at that price of $5,600. Below him, Breece Hall, that's one I'm going to want to see play out in that Jets offense. How much is Michael Carter going to be involved? Is he going to be involved just on third downs, or is he going to get some rushing attempts and goal line attempts as well? I want to see that. I really do like Eli Mitchell here on the 49ers side of things. He is battling a hamstring injury, as you can see there, but assuming that he is ready to roll in week 1, you can see here there's a note, unquestioned number 1 running back. And we all know when you're an unquestioned number 1 running back in this 49ers offense, you have tremendous upside. We've seen it for years now with Kyle Shanahan. So assuming that Mitchell is ready to roll in week 1, I love him at that price there at $5,400, especially in that matchup against Chicago. And then below Eli Mitchell, not a lot going on. We know the running backs get really weak in the low 5K range, and anything below that, you're basically banking on an injury to a starter in order for one of these backups to meet value at that price. I think A.J. Dillon has some GPP appeal there at $5,300, and just with the same ideology that we talked about with Aaron Jones, a guy who could see 10-plus rushing attempts and 5-plus targets in week 1. I would not be shocked if Green Bay gets both those guys involved. I want to have more exposure to Aaron Jones, but A.J. Dillon is certainly interesting at that price of $5,300. We saw him get involved at times last year. There's a game with 22.3 DraftKings points, another game there with 20, 15.7, 27. I mean, that's crushing value at that price of $5,300. Again, don't want to touch him on the cash game side of things, but definitely some appeal there for GPPs and tournaments. All right, now we're on to the wide receivers here, and from a cash game perspective, I notoriously pay up for the running back position versus the wide receiver position. Now, if there's a lot of value here for a high-priced wide receiver, I'll definitely take advantage of that and put him in my cash lineup. For example, if Devontae Adams were still playing for Green Bay this year and he was priced at $8,100, he'd absolutely be in the mix for my cash game plays. But he doesn't. He plays for the Raiders now, so he's more of a GPP play for me in week one. Same thing there with Justin Jefferson, Tyreek Hill, Jamar Chase. Those guys are definitely on my GPP radar. We know the upside that they have, but probably not going to spend up for them in my cash lineup. Scrolling down here just a little bit, there's Jalen Waddle if we wanted to mix him in there with Tua. But Brandon Cooks at $6,300 was someone that stuck out to me here initially. Saw a really nice volume last year. Even with David Mills towards the end of the season, you can see it there. 3 straight weeks with double-digit targets. That turned into some really nice fantasy production. He had some big games in general last year. You can see there 3 straight weeks with 20-plus DraftKings points. And this is a game here against the Indianapolis Colts where they're likely losing and playing from behind. So, yeah, I like the upside that he has in that matchup there, especially playing indoors at home, and likely someone who's going to fly under the radar. Some really nice plays here in the 6K range, all guys that could have a case made for them to be played in GPPs. But let's scroll down here a little bit in the mid 5K range. Really kind of my first cash game wide receiver that I like there is Michael Pittman Jr. of the Indianapolis Colts. And this is largely due to the price here at $5,500. Far too cheap, especially considering the matchup against the Houston Texans. This was a guy who just clearly got better with each and every game last year, the clear-cut number 1 wide receiver in this offense, and got a quarterback upgrade at that from Carson Wentz to Matt Ryan. I'm hesitant to say I'm locking anybody in my cash lineup one full week before we even have kickoff on this main slate, but if I had to pick someone, Michael Pittman Jr. would be right at the top of that list. Now, going back to some GPP plays here, right below Pittman Jr., I talked about Adam Thielen earlier. You could stack him up with Kirk Cousins. Rashad Bateman has every opportunity in the world to be the number 1 wide receiver in Baltimore. Definitely some interesting appeal there, as well as Juju with a new offense in Kansas City. Obviously, Travis Kelce is the guy there, but he could see 7+ targets in this game, maybe score a touchdown in meat value at $5,200. And I really like the chemistry I saw between Trey Lance and Brandon Ayuk in training camp this year. You could stack those two guys up, really cheap to do that, with Trey Lance just being $6,000. But getting back to the cash side of things here, there's 2 guys at $5,100 that stick out to me. Christian Kirk and Elijah Moore. And Christian Kirk got paid this offseason to be the number 1 wide receiver in this Jacksonville offense. So I imagine that Trevor Lawrence is going to be looking for him early and often. And I like the matchup there against the Washington Commanders as well. Elijah Moore, a little tougher matchup there against Baltimore, but a guy who should see a lot of volume this year. Yeah, that really picked up towards the end of last season. You can see that there. And he had some really nice games as well. By all means, someone who can meet value at that price of $5,100. And a game where New York is likely playing from behind as well, so he could just be force-fed targets in that game. Scrolling down here in the 4K range, definitely some guys that have some GPP appeal. Marquez Valdez-Scantling, similar to Juju, brand new offense, but we know that Kansas City offense is going to score points in a game that has some shootout potential as well against Arizona. That's a game that you could definitely stack up. Scrolling down here just a little bit more, Nico Collins sticks out to me on the GPP side of things. Very similar situation with Brandon Cooks. He could see quite a few targets in this game, especially if they're playing from behind. Against the Indianapolis Colts, I like him there at $4,200. But getting back to the cash side of things here, the last 2 guys that stuck out to me above 4K, and we'll get into the 3K range later on in the week, but Kadarius Toney and Rondale Moore. Now, you see there's a questionable tag next to each one of these guys. We obviously need to keep an eye on that. But assuming these guys are a full go, I love this price of $4,100. They could easily meet value there at that price. That's what, 12.3 DraftKings points in order to meet 3x value? They're certainly capable of doing that. We saw Kadarius Toney do it at times last year. I know he was battling injuries last year and obviously battling injuries here in training camp, but I remember back in week 5 was kind of his first real full game as a starter. He had 13 targets in that game, 10 receptions, 189 receiving yards, didn't score a touchdown, and still had close to 33 DraftKings points. We only need 12 from him here in week 1 at that price of $4,100. Certainly capable of doing that, and I do not mind the matchup there against the Tennessee Titans. Now, Rondale Moore, it's probably a lot more in question for him to play in week 1. You can actually see here it's a close call for being available in week 1, but if he does play, I think the volume should be there. 6+ targets in this game with no DeAndre Hopkins available for the first 8 weeks, I believe it is. So yeah, someone who should be more involved. We do need to keep an eye on that. But assuming he does play, $4,000 really cheap and easy to meet value. Now, there's obviously going to be some value in this 3K range. Like I said, I want to dive into that a little bit further, and I'll have more updates on that in my videos later this week. Now we're moving on here to the tight ends, and I notoriously don't spend up at the tight end position when it comes to my cash lineup, unless there's massive value for a guy like Mark Andrews or Travis Kelce, and they kind of have that value here in week 1 in the 6K range, but unfortunately, I probably won't be spending up for them. GPPs, I'll spend up for those guys any given week, no matter what the price is. The higher they go in price, the lower their ownership goes, so I'm actually okay with that when it comes to tournaments. But yeah, don't really love them on the cash side of things. In week 1, they'll absolutely be on my radar for GPPs. You know, George Kittle, Kyle Pitts, Darren Waller, I don't mind them, but I'd rather just spend the extra $1,000 and pay up for Andrews and Kelce if I had to pick that here today. Hawkinson is absolutely interesting there at $4,900 in a good matchup against Philadelphia. And on the other side of that game, Dallas Goedert as well at $4,500. If I wanted to roll out Jalen Hurts and or Jared Goff, I could stack them up with either one of those tight ends. And Dallas Goedert might even have some cash game appeal, but I'd rather go with Zach Ertz here at $4,400. I know he's got the questionable tag next to his name as well, but assuming that he does play, I really like this matchup here against the Kansas City Chiefs. They don't have Tyrann Mathieu playing at the safety position anymore. And again, no DeAndre Hopkins, so these wide receivers and Zach Ertz should have more targets going their way in general. So $4,400, he really started to turn it on towards the end of the season with Arizona. You could see the targets were absolutely there. And not massive DraftKings points, but we really don't need that from him this week at $4,400. If he gets us 12, 13, we're okay with that in our cash lineup. And I think there's even more upside there, especially with no DeAndre Hopkins. And then below Zach Ertz there, Pat Freiermuth is absolutely interesting. I'm going to have a close eye on him this year. Obviously, the quarterback situation in Pittsburgh is not ideal right now, so I'm going to want to see that play out a little bit before I start to roster Freiermuth too much, but I love the upside with him just coming into year 2 here, rookie last year, and a good price there at $4,200. More of a GPP play, but I'll probably avoid it here in week 1. The next guy that really sticks out to me here in the 3K range is Cole Kmet. This is a super tough matchup week 1 against the 49ers, but might just be fed enough volume to meet value here at $3,700. You can see was very consistent towards the end of last year. 5+ targets in every single game dating back to week 12. And he should be the number 2 pass catcher in this offense this year behind Darnell Mooney. Again, a tough matchup, but could be fed enough volume playing from behind to really meet value there. I also think Evan Ingram is interesting there. New team there with the Jacksonville Jags. We know that Trevor Lawrence loved to target his tight ends last year, and maybe this is just a place for Ingram to kind of resurrect his career. Really cheap price there at $3,500. And if we're looking to punt a little bit cheaper than that, Hayden Hurst of the Cincinnati Bengals kind of sticks out to me. A new team for him as well, but we need about 9-10 points for him to meet value. And again, at that price, we're essentially punting. But Hayden Hurst is definitely talented, so I don't mind that at all. And then if Logan Thomas does play here in week 1, you can see he took part in 7-on-7 drills on Wednesday. Sounds like he has a chance to play in week 1. If he does, I don't mind him at this price at all. You know, we've seen the upside with him in the past, and Carson Wentz is not afraid to target his tight ends. So $3,200, again, we're punting, but if Logan Thomas plays, I do like that matchup and that price there for him at $3,200 against the Jags. And then we got the defenses there. We'll keep this short and sweet. You guys know the drill here. Typically, don't spend up for defense in my cash lineup unless I have extra money laying around. I will spend up for them in GPPs just to make my lineups a little different, but I'm not forcing myself to pay up for defense either. I'd rather spend up at other positions. So in terms of cash, I usually just go below the 3K mark here and find a defense that looks nice in the 2K range. And for week 1, the defense that stuck out to me here was the Miami Dolphins. And I know that probably doesn't sound all that thrilling initially, but I do like the matchup here at home against the New England Patriots. And I know in years past we probably wouldn't have said that, but I'm not really sold on Mac Jones yet. I do think he's going to have a long career in the NFL, probably with the Patriots, but still making too many mistakes to where I like the opposing defense. And look, Miami's got some playmakers on the back end as well. We saw that towards the end of last season. They had some really big games. You can see there against New England in Week 18, they had 20 DraftKings points. They had an interception, 2 defensive fumble recoveries, 2 sacks, even scored 2 touchdowns as well. New Orleans, they had 25 points. Carolina, 23. So there's definitely some upside there with that defense. But again, it comes down to the price here, $2,600. They are playing at home, so I do like that. And again, just not really sold on this New England offense. Josh McDaniels left to the Raiders this offseason, and it sounds like Matt Patricia could be making calls for them now. Well, he's a defensive coordinator, so I don't really know how that's going to work out. I hate to bet against Bill Belichick, but I think I might be doing that here in Week 1. If I want to save a little bit more money, probably the Vikings defense there at home at $2,200. Aaron Rodgers is probably not going to make mistakes here in this game, but those rookie wide receivers, we don't know what to expect from them in this offense in general, really. All right, now that we've gone position by position here, talking about some of the cash game plays and GPP plays that are sticking out to me here early on in the week, let's go ahead and put together a first look cash lineup, and then we'll put together a first look GPP lineup. So on the cash side of things, I mentioned 2 quarterbacks earlier. That was Jalen Hurts and Trey Lance. I do prefer Jalen Hurts. I love that matchup against Detroit, and obviously has proven a little bit more than Trey Lance has. Like I said, if I need to save that $800, I'm not afraid to pivot there, but let's kick it off here with Jalen Hurts and move on to the running backs. Now, I could go with Jonathan Taylor, I could go with Christian McCaffrey, I could go with Austin Eckler. I for sure want one of those guys in my lineup. I'm going to go with the guy who's just been notoriously great week in and week out when healthy, and that is Christian McCaffrey. And that's not a slight at Jonathan Taylor. He's going to have a huge year this year, more than likely. But I'll take the price savings, and I'll take the PPR upside of McCaffrey over Jonathan Taylor. Scroll down here a little bit. I talked about Aaron Jones a lot on this video. I love him both on the cash game side of things and GPP side of things. Probably going to be a staple in my lineup with Michael Pittman Jr. Like I said, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but those 2 guys look great here in Week 1. And let's go ahead and put another running back in my lineup, because I notoriously like to put in 3 running backs for my cash lineup. I'm not afraid to put in a wide receiver. You're not going to see me put a tight end in the flex position in my cash lineup, but I prefer to go the running back route. And if it is Eli Mitchell healthy Week 1 for the 49ers, I do love that price and matchup against the Chicago Bears. All right, so we got about $4,500 left over for each position. We're at the wide receivers here. Like I said, probably not going to be able to spend up, but I know that I want Michael Pittman Jr. there at $5,500. So that leaves us with $4,200 left over. Now let's go to these wide receivers that I mentioned in the $5K range. I'm actually going to put in both Christian Kirk and Elijah Moore at their price. So basically, we got Pittman, Kirk, and Moore all in the mid to low 5K range. We essentially need 45 to 50 points from these 3 in order to meet value. I do think that those 3 can get there. Now, I got $3,400 left over per position. Let's just go ahead and put in that Miami defense to see what we're left over there at the tight end position. All right, so I really liked Zach Ertz, right? $4,400. I'm going to put him in there right now. Obviously, we're minus $100, so this lineup would not work, but it gives you an idea of where I'm kind of thinking here for Week 1. I wish I could roll this out. I actually really do like this here. Maybe this gets to the point where we pivot off of Miami and go to the Minnesota Vikings, or you say, you know what, this is the time to put in Trey Lance here, and then that gives you an extra $700 to spend elsewhere. So you got some options there. This is a first look, but I kind of like that from the cash side of things. All right, now let's put together a first look GPP lineup as well. And I mentioned earlier I would do that with Kirk Cousins and the Minnesota Vikings and then run it back on the Packers side of things. So let's kick it off here with Cousins. We're going to go ahead and stack him up with Justin Jefferson. And we could go with Adam Thielen or KJ Osborne as well, but I'm actually going to go with Irv Smith here. I like the price at $3,400. I know he's questionable right now, but assuming that he does play, the touchdown upside is definitely there in this offense, and he really doesn't need much to meet value at that price of $3,400, while giving us some money back to fill out the rest of our lineup. And then we're going to go ahead and put in Aaron Jones there as well, running it back with him on the Packers side of things. And I'm not really worried about the game script there for the Packers, whether they're leading or losing in this game. Aaron Jones will be involved. So I like that start there to that lineup, a little game stack between the Vikings and Packers. Now let's put in another running back here. I went with Christian McCaffrey in my cash lineup. Let's go with Jonathan Taylor. I want exposure to him as well in week 1. That's a pretty damn good start if you ask me, but we only got $4,200 left over to fill out 2 wide receivers, a flex, and defense. So let's go to the wide receiver position here, scroll down to the 4K range. As I mentioned earlier, definitely some guys in here that I like. MVS is definitely one of those guys. But Nico Collins here at $4,200. You kind of get a little mini stack there between him and Jonathan Taylor, essentially stating, hey, Indianapolis gets out to an early lead, Jonathan Taylor runs the ball a lot, and then Houston's playing from behind where guys like Brandon Cooks and Nico Collins could see a lot of targets thrown their way. So I like that there. And then in the 3K range, there's a guy named Josh Palmer who's had a lot of hype around him at Chargers training camp. Justin Herbert can't stop talking about him. Wide receiver number 3 in that offense. I talked about that game quite a bit in this video between the Chargers and Vegas. Definitely some high scoring potential there. And Palmer's one of those guys that should be lower owned in that game in general. So now we got about $4,500 left over to fill out the flex and defense. Let's just put a defense in there, and I'm going to go right back to the Dolphins. I love that matchup at home against New England. That gives us $6,300 to fill in the flex spot. Now I could go with another little mini stack here with Josh Jacobs and Josh Palmer, but I don't really love the situation for the running backs for the Raiders this year. I could switch Brandon Cooks and Nico Collins, I suppose, and go with another cheap wide receiver. Or I could go with someone like Marquise Brown and Saquon Barkley. I like both of those guys, even Amon-Ra St. Brown, T. Higgins, DJ Moore. Some nice GPP plays in general in this range. Let's go here with Marquise Hollywood Brown. Love that game in general between them and Kansas City. Definitely some high scoring potential there as well. But just to recap this here, we're going to kick it off with a stack between Minnesota and Green Bay. We got Cousins stacked up with Jefferson and Irv Smith, running it back with Aaron Jones. We then got a little mini stack between Jonathan Taylor and Nico Collins in that game. And then we're going to wrap it up there with Josh Palmer, Marquise Brown, and the Miami Dolphins. Again, it's a first look GPP lineup, but you might see this one played on my side come week 1. All right, everyone, that is going to wrap up this video here for today. As always, thank y'all for taking the time out of your day to watch the content here on this channel. If you could like this video and subscribe to the channel, I would greatly appreciate that. Let's have ourselves a great day here, folks, and let's get ready here for week 1 of the NFL season. I got plenty more content coming your way, so stay tuned for that. But in the meantime, I'm out of here.